In this video, I'm going to talk about oligopoly. It will follow sections in Chapter 9 and Bayes prints. And before I begin, again, let's put things into perspective. And in the last few videos, we talked about three models, three kinds of industries: monopoly, monopolistic competition, and competitive industry. So what we've covered so far were the two opposite and extreme cases. The case of monopoly, where there is a single firm in the market and it doesn't have any competitors and it has all the market power. And with the two kinds of competition, there is a large number of firms and free entry and exit into the industry. So firms have very little market power, and in the end, it results in zero profits in both cases. What remains is the most interesting set of cases, the set of cases that's usually put under the umbrella of oligopoly. So this is a situation when there are only few large firms spanning the whole market. Not a single firm, but not a ton of firms either. And this case is usually left for last because this is the only case when we're looking at situations of strategic interdependence. That is cases when decisions of other firms will affect a firm in question. In the monopoly case, since there is a single firm, there are no other firms present. In the two competitive cases, because the number of firms is so large, we analyze the decisions of typical firms in isolation because we assume that those decisions do not have any effect on the performance on other firms. The only way that firms affect each other is by entering and exiting in the long run. In the oligopoly case, however, firms' decisions will have effects on their competitors, and this is the core of the oligopoly analysis, identifying what is the best way of action given what your opponents in the same industry will want to do. And so there are several oligopoly models, and in this video I'm only going to focus on two of them, and they differ with respect to the kinds and the timing of decisions. But all oligopoly models have several common features. The first feature being that there are only a few large firms in the industry, and they can produce identical or differentiated products. So you can have a model with identical products or a model with differentiated products, and they will make their own decisions, either set their own prices or decide how much to produce. And finally, there are going to be barriers to entry. So oligopoly is usually closer to monopoly rather than any sort of competition that results in zero profits in the long run. And in today's video, I'm going to look at two basic models of oligopoly, two building blocks on which you can build more complicated models of oligopoly. And those two basic models are called competition in prices and competition in quantities. And competition in prices originated in the writings of a French economist, Bertrand, in 1883. So it's relatively older of the two models. And the competition in quantities is almost 50 years. Sorry, Bertrand is relatively younger of the two. And the competition in quantities is called Cournot competition after French mathematician and economist Cournot. And so rumors are that the Bertrand competition was just his misinterpretation of the Cournot model. So Cournot model is the model that gives rise to all models of competition. Bertrand's was sort of incorrect interpretation of Cournot, but basically we now have these two opposing situations. And in one situation, companies choose prices, and the other situation, companies choose quantities. But let me emphasize what the difference is. And my own intuitive interpretation is that competition on prices better works when companies have enough capacity to potentially serve the whole market. So when companies are really trying to compete for customers, and the company that loses that competition doesn't get any customers at all. The Cournot case better suits situations when firm capacities matter, but each can only serve a fraction of the market rather than the whole market. So for competition and prices, the winner can potentially serve everybody. For competition and quantities, it is assumed that the winner of that competition would simply make more profits, but other companies will make profits too. And so in competition and prices, firms compete by setting prices, and whoever sets the lowest price gets the market. So the price competition, the winner of the price for competition is the company that sets the lowest price. In the competition in quantities, firms compete by choosing their output, and if the total output of the industry is going to be high, the price is going to be low, and if the total output of the industry is going to be low, the price is going to be high. So it's the total output, the sum of the decisions of the individual firms, that determines what the market price and thus what the profits of the companies are going to be. And if we want to think about examples, so think about software producers or retailers as being examples, or like the closest real-world industries that resemble Bertrand competition. Because if there are two retailers, say Target and Walmart, offering the same product, they really do compete in prices by trying to offer the best price to the consumer so that the consumer buys from them rather than from the other company. And when it comes to producing oil, if you read the news, if there is a lot of oil in the market, then the price of oil is low. If there is a limited amount of oil in the market, the supply is restricted, then the price is going to be high. But every oil producing company is able to constantly sell its oil at the going market price. It's not that in the competition quantities you don't get to sell if your output is too high or if your price is too high or anything. So for quantity competition, everybody gets to participate in the market. For price competition, the usual assumption is that only the lowest price works in the market. So let's see how these two kinds of competition work. First, I'm going to talk about competition prices. And to illustrate competition prices, I'm going to use this very simple example. I will assume that there are two sellers who have identical marginal costs of $10 of producing a unit of output, and there is one buyer who wants to buy 1 unit of output. So think about this. You want to buy, I don't know, a set of tires from two tire companies, tire sellers in Sioux Falls, or you want to buy a TV from a retail store. And you really, the only thing that you care about is to get the lowest price possible. So companies offering identical products, you as the buyer care about the lowest price. And so to assign rules to this competitive case, we'll say that the sellers will simultaneously post their prices and the buyer will buy at the lowest price. So the buyer will compare the prices and go to the seller who offers the lowest price. And so this assumption is called perfect information assumption. That means that the buyer will be perfectly informed about what options there are available on the table. And what we'll be looking for is called an equilibrium. And in an equilibrium, both sellers will aim to maximize their profits given what the other seller is going to do. So we'll be looking for situations, for outcomes that refer to cases when you can't improve your profit given what your opponent has done. So it's going to be sort of a best case scenario if we keep the opponent's action fixed. And so to give you a better idea of what it's going to look like, we'll start away from the equilibrium. So suppose the following situation. Suppose that the first seller is going to offer the product for $25 and the second seller is going to offer the product for $22. Is this situation an equilibrium situation? Can we expect these kind of prices to persist in a particular market for a long time? And the answer is no, this cannot be an equilibrium, because in this case, the buyer by comparing the prices, would go to seller B, pay $22 and get the product for $22. So seller B will make 22 minus 10, $12. Seller A will make nothing because their price is too high and nobody's buying from them. So it's not an equilibrium because seller A could have done better by undercutting seller B's price. So if A reduced their price from 25 to 21, seller A would have been better off and would have made a positive profit. But so if on the next day you woke up and wanted to buy 1 unit of output again, and you saw a different price by seller A and the same price by seller B, this situation still is not going to be an equilibrium because now it's seller B who is at a loss because he is now charging too high a price and it's in seller's B interest to undercut seller A's offer. So seller B would be willing to set the price equal to 20 rather than 22 because when seller A sells at 21, it's better to charge a slightly lower price but to ensure that the buyer comes to you rather than to your competitor. Now, if we generalize this approach, you can see that any outcome, any combination of prices in which the two sellers offer different prices will not be in equilibrium. The seller who offered a higher price would be willing to reduce their price, to undercut the competitor. So it can be an equilibrium that sellers offer different prices. Now let's look at a different example. Suppose that you wake up and both sellers offer the same price of 20. Can this price combination be an equilibrium? And if you think about it, the answer is still no. This cannot be an equilibrium because when the price is 20, you're not entirely sure whether the buyer will go to you or to your competitor. And if you still slightly undercut your competitor, you can guarantee a payoff of 9, a profit of $9 by offering the price of 19 instead of price 20. So even though the two sellers are offering the same prices, there is still an incentive for either of them to undercut the competitor's price, to go just a little lower and to ensure that the buyer comes to you rather than to your competitor. So then you can see that on the one hand, they can't offer different prices because this situation is not an equilibrium. Seller B is at a loss. They can't offer the same prices as long as those prices exceed the marginal cost. So any price above the marginal cost of 10 that either seller offers, the other seller would have an incentive to just undercut it slightly. And so there can be an equilibrium in which any seller offers price above the marginal cost. So what is left? The only scenario that would work is that both sellers should offer $10. And if that is the case, then neither seller can improve their payoff by going with a higher or lower price. Going with a lower price will mean negative profit. Going with a higher price will mean you don't get to sell. So the only equilibrium of this kind of competition is setting price equal to the marginal cost. You earn 0, but this is the best you can do. And so the interesting observation about this outcome is that we get a perfectly competitive outcome, the efficient outcome where price equals marginal cost, even with only two sellers. So if it's just two competitors competing in prices, you still get the outcome that you get in a competitive market with many small firms acting as price takers. Now, when it comes to reality, real companies try to avoid this kind of outcome because that simply means that if you have Target and Walmart in town, neither Target nor Walmart will be making money because they will be forced to be selling products at the marginal cost rather than making profit off every item that they're selling. And so real companies try to avoid this outcome by taking advantage of the fact that the perfect information assumption is too strong. And so sometimes the buyer doesn't have perfect information and the buyer has to spend time comparing prices. So you can go to Walmart and then you'll need to go online and see how much the item is priced at Target. And it takes time. And so the strategy that the companies have adopted to get away from this marginal cost equilibrium is called price matching. So rather than just constantly checking what the other company has to offer, under price matching, you offer a price that is above the marginal cost, and then you promise to match the competitors' prices. But now it's on the buyer to discover the competitor's price. So rather than monitoring every competitor in town and ensuring that your price is currently the lowest in the market, instead you're saying, okay, you can buy from me, but if anyone else offers a lower price, you can still buy from me and I'll give you the lower price. So if a buyer is uninformed, they can come to A and still buy at $15, not knowing that there is a second option of buying at 12. But if somebody takes time into comparing prices, then they would see that the other price is lower, and so they might buy from seller B, or they might still come to seller A and say, I want the item at 12, and seller A would say, sure, I'll sell it to you at 12. So this price matching strategy actually prevents this price war of going all the way down to the marginal cost and undercutting each other until you can't do that any longer. So without price matching, seller A would have an incentive to go down below 12 to say 11.95 or 11. With price matching, seller A can stay at a high price and charge buyers different prices depending on whether they know that their alternative option is to buy at 12. So that's an interesting idea. Next, Cournot competition, competition and quantities. For competition and quantities, I will give you the following simple example. I'm going to look at the situation when there are two oil-producing companies and they will have identical marginal and average costs of 10. That means that it costs $10 on average to produce oil, and it costs $10 to produce any additional unit of oil, so there are no fixed cost. Just no matter how much you want to produce, one unit costs you $10. And the inverse demand for oil is going to be equal to 100 minus the total output of the two countries. So the countries will independently decide how much to produce, and 100 minus their joint output will determine the market price. And so countries choose outputs, and of course their goal is to maximize their share of the profit. So for them, we can write down the profit as price minus average cost. This is how much you're going to earn per unit times the number of units you're able to sell. So price minus average cost times the output, that's your profit. And you want to choose output that will maximize your profit, but you also have to take into account that the other company is trying to do the same, trying to select their output that will maximize their profit. So again, if you look at the situation, from the onset, it's not entirely clear what the other company is going to do. But we're going to focus on the equilibrium situation. We're going to identify a situation in which you can't do better given the other countries or the other company's output. So here's how we're going to proceed. Say it comes to the decision of country one of how much to produce. How should you decide how much to produce? Well, country one should make some kind of a guess about what country two is going to do and maximize their profit with respect to the guess about what country two is going to be doing. So you don't know what country two is going to produce, but you have to make a guess about it, and given your guess, you have to select your Q1 so that your profit is maximized. So let's write down the profit function of country one. It's going to be the price in the market minus the average cost of 10 times the country one's output. And here, the only novelty is I'm going to use small q2 rather than capital Q2 to distinguish the country one's guess about country two's output from the actual output of country two. So country one doesn't know how much country two is going to produce, But if it thinks that it's going to produce Q2, the profit of country 1 looks like this expression, and country 1 would want to maximize it. So to maximize profit, we need to take the derivative of the profit function with respect to Q1, because country 1 is only responsible for how much it's going to produce, and so it treats country 2's output, or its guess about country 2's output, as a fixed value. So we need to take the derivative of profit with respect to Q1 and set it to 0. And so that derivative is going to be 100 minus 2Q1 minus Q2 minus 10 equal to 0. And recall, just like marginal revenue has twice the slope compared to the inverse demand, when we write down the profit function, we again double the slope for our own output. And if we can solve this equation for Q1, we'll get that the optimal Q1 has to be 1/2 of 90 minus Q2. So if we believe that country 2 is going to produce small Q2 barrels of oil, we should be producing 1/2 of 90 minus that amount. So we'll call this function, and it's a function because we don't know what Q2 is. We'll call this function country 1's best response to the output of country 2. Or you can think of it as a best response to country 1's guess about the output of country 2. So the idea here is we need to decide what Q2 is going to be, and then we need to produce 1/2 of 90 minus that Q2. Let's do an example. For instance, if we decide that Q2 is going to be 50, we should be producing 1/2 of 90 minus 50, which is 20. So the best response function simply tells us what our best action would be given what we think the other country is doing. But now we need to mirror that logic for country 2. We need to say, well, country 1 will be producing best response to whatever we think country 2 should be producing. But then country 2 should also be producing best response to what they believe country 1 will be producing. So country 1 has a best response equation with respect to their guess about country 2's output, and country 2 will have a similar best response equation with their guess about country 1's output. And so in equilibrium, both countries have to guess correctly. That means that country 1 should understand that country 2's output will be best response to country 1's output. So small q2 has to be country 2's best response to the real q1. They have to guess correctly, because if they don't guess correctly, it won't be in equilibrium. And so in equilibrium, q1 would be a best response to q2, and q2 will be a best response to q1. So we'll have a system of two equations in two unknowns, so we should be able to solve that. And besides, you can notice that the system is symmetric. So we can say that q1 and q2 have to equal each other in equilibrium, and they have to equal to 30. So in this story, each country is going to produce 30, and you can convince yourself that 30 is the best response to 30. And if that's the case, then the price is going to be 100 minus 60 and $40, and each country is going to be making $900 in profit. And if we look at this demand function and the costs of 10, earning $900 in profit will give a joint profit of $1,800, which is worse than what a monopoly would have earned in this market, but still a lot better than a competitive output. So when it comes to competition and quantities, that competition does take a bite away from the monopoly profit, but still companies competing in quantities end up making positive profits. When it comes to competition and prices, that competition results in the competitive outcome where profits of each participating company is just zero. So that is the main difference between the two models. But sometimes you can think about situations where there are elements of both competition and quantities and competition and prices. So please remember that these two models are the basic building blocks for more complicated models of real-world oligopolies. Thank you.